You use it every single day, you probably never think about it. But look at your keyboard, why on earth does it start with QWERTY? Who decided that and why did we all just go along with it? The layout you grew up on wasn't designed for your fingers, it was designed for a machine that no longer exists. And at least once, a better arrangement came breathtakingly close to replacing it entirely. To understand the keyboard you're staring at right now, you have to go back to Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1868, is where a man named Christopher Latham Scholes was trying to solve a very specific mechanical problem. Scholes had already built a working typewriter, one of the first serious attempts at a commercial writing machine, and on paper, his original key arrangement made perfect logical sense. The letters were laid out in two rows, roughly alphabetical order, A through Z, neatly organized, intuitive. Exactly what you design if you sat down with a blank sheet of paper and thought, what would make learning this easiest? The problem was that the machine kept jamming. When a typist hit two keys in quick succession, especially common letter pairs like SD or TH, the metal arms that swung up to strike the ink ribbon would collide with each other midair and lock together in a tangled mess. Typists had to stop, reach in, and manually separate them. On a good day, this was an annoyance. For someone trying to sell a machine to a business, it was a disaster. Scholes brought in his business partner, James Densmore, who had zero patience for elegant design and complete obsession with getting this product to market. Densmore's solution was blunt: move the most commonly paired letters away from each other, scatter them. Force the mechanical arms to come from different directions so they couldn't physically collide. The layout that resulted wasn't drawn up by a linguist or an ergonomist. It was drawn up by two men trying to stop metal arms from crashing into each other in a wooden box. Letters that appear together, often in English, T and H for instance, got pushed apart. Letters that almost never appeared together ended up as neighbors. It worked. The jams mostly stopped. But the letter arrangement that fixed the jam problem was now physically baked into the machine, and that machine was about to become very, very successful. In 1873, Scholes signed a manufacturing deal with E. Remington and Sons, a company that had made its fortune in firearms and was looking to pivot into consumer goods after the Civil War slowed weapons orders. Remington had factories, distribution networks, and salespeople. They had the infrastructure to turn a workshop prototype into a product on every office desk in America. And so they did. The Remington No. 1 launched with Scholes' jam prevention layout more or less intact. And by 1878, the Remington No. 2 added the QWERTY arrangement in nearly the form we'd recognize today, including, bizarrely, the decision to put the letters TYP, or ITER all on the top row, so that salespeople could impressively type the word typewriter quickly during demonstrations without having to hunt for keys on unfamiliar rows. That is almost certainly not why the top row was arranged that way, but the fact that it works so neatly is one of those happy coincidences that made Remington's sales pitch smoother than it had any right to be. Here is where the story bends in a direction nobody planned. As Remington's machines spread through American offices in the 1880s, typing schools began to open. Businesses needed typists, typists needed training, and training schools needed to pick one layout to teach on. They picked the layout on the machines they could buy, which was Remington's, which meant their graduates arrived at offices already trained on QWERTY, which meant offices bought more Remington-compatible machines to match their staff, which meant more training schools taught QWERTY to match the offices. This is a feedback loop, not a conspiracy. Nobody sat in a room and decided to lock in QWERTY. It locked itself in because each individual decision was completely rational given the decisions already made. By 1890, there were thousands of trained QWERTY typists in American cities. The layout had stopped being a product choice and had quietly become an infrastructure. The moment that truly sealed QWERTY's dominance arrived not through law or patent, but through competition, specifically through a typing speed contest in 1888 in Cincinnati, Ohio. A court reporter named Frank McGurran had memorized the QWERTY keyboard, not just learned it, memorized it so completely that he could type without looking at his hands at all. Touch typing, it was called, and McGurran had practiced it on a QWERTY Remington. At the Cincinnati contest, he faced off against Louis Taube, who used a rival layout on a different machine and who typed using 8 fingers while watching the keys. McGurran won by a margin that made the audience gasp. He wasn't faster because QWERTY was superior. He was faster because he had invested enormous time learning to type without looking, and QWERTY was the layout he'd learned on. But the newspapers didn't report it that way. They reported it as proof that the QWERTY system was the Cincinnati contest became a case study taught in typing schools. Those schools then trained a second generation of QWERTY typists. By the time the American National Standards Institute, the body that would eventually have the authority to formalize keyboard standards, looked at the question seriously in the 20th century, there were so many trained typists, so many machines, and so much institutional curriculum built around QWERTY that certifying anything else would have meant asking an entire industry to start over. The standard was formally recognized not because it was optimal, but because changing it would cost more than keeping it. In 1936, a man named August Dvorak, a professor at the University of Washington and a legitimate educational psychologist, received a patent for a keyboard layout he and his brother-in-law William Dealey had developed over years of careful research. Dvorak had studied letter frequency in English, mapped where typists' fingers naturally rested and moved, and arranged the keys so that the most common letters fell directly under the strongest fingers on the home row. In the Dvorak simplified keyboard, roughly 70% of typing happens on that middle row. On QWERTY, that number is closer to 32%. Fingers on QWERTY travel significantly more total distance during a typical typing session. Dvorak's layout was, by almost every measurable mechanical metric, more efficient. During World War II, the U.S. Navy funded a study supervised, somewhat controversially, by Dvorak himself that concluded retraining typists on the Dvorak layout paid for itself in productivity gains within 10 days. There were genuine advocates, there were trials. There was a real window in the mid-20th century when the Dvorak layout might have achieved critical mass. What stopped it was the same force that had created QWERTY's dominance in the first place: trained people, existing machines, and institutional momentum. Every office that had already invested in QWERTY typewriters and QWERTY-trained staff would have to spend money retraining and re-equipping for a benefit that would only arrive months later. The math didn't work for any individual decision-maker, even when it might have worked for society as a whole. Dvorak died in 1975 without seeing his layout become standard. It exists today as an alternative setting buried in the accessibility options of most operating systems, available, functional, and almost entirely unused. The typewriter that created QWERTY hasn't been manufactured at industrial scale since the 1980s. The mechanical arms that jammed, the entire physical reason the letters were scattered into this arrangement, don't exist in the device you're typing on right now. Your laptop has no moving parts that could collide. Your phone has no arms at all. The problem QWERTY was built to solve vanished decades ago, and the solution is still sitting right in front of you, baked into every keyboard ever shipped, taught to every child who learns to type, embedded in every interface designed around the assumption that your fingers know where the cue is. Next time you reach for the backspace key and notice how far it is from the home row, next time you catch yourself hunting for a symbol you use every day, you are feeling the ghost of a mechanical arm that last jammed in the 19th century. The layout on your screen right now was never chosen for your hands. It was chosen for a machine that no longer exists, locked in by a speed contest that tested the wrong thing, and kept in place by a calculation that made perfect sense for everyone who came before you. You inherited it. And somewhere in your keyboard settings, very quietly, the Dvorak layout is still waiting.